Welcome to Love for the Truth Radio, a program devoted to encouraging you to be a contender of the faith in an ever-changing church culture. On Love for the Truth Radio, we will discuss current issues and challenging views along with biblical truth that can affect our Christian worldview and how we live out our faith. And now, here's your host, Cindy Hartline.
Welcome to the program. You know, many would agree that we are living in the last days and that the Lord's return is imminent. But how do we know for sure? Jesus told his disciples in the Olivet Discourse that specific events would be signs to look for, and that applies to us too. Matthew 24 reads that nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and that there would be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Nation in Hebrew is ethnos, meaning ethnicity. Specific ethnic groups oftentimes have mindsets conformed by the God that they worship and serve, thereby depicting their culture, meaning the way they live out their lives, promoting the spirit behind their morality. What is profane versus what is holy? The United States, though comprised with many ethnic groups, I believe was a nation united by the mindset cultivated by Judeo-Christian principles. Most lived life based on biblical truths, which I believe is what made America great. So why now the great divide? Though President Trump is trying to uphold some of those biblical principles, extreme resistance is inevitable. We may be witnessing ethnos rising against ethnos, the God I serve against the God you serve, the spirit I am led by versus the spirit you are led by, cultivating immorality versus morality. Get the picture? The U.S. now has two different spirits. 8 years ago, former President Obama offered change. But did anyone know specifically what that change was? People seem to be confused. Was Barack Obama a Christian as he professed to be? Or was he at heart a Muslim? I believe the confusion we are witnessing now has a lot to do with Obama's legacy. He may have changed a lot more than we think, especially the mindsets of those who bought into his way of thinking, his way of life. Our guest, William Koenig, author of the book Revealed, Obama's Legacy, says, today very few people fully understand the extensive consequences of President Obama's 2 terms in office. Life as we know it in America will never be the same. William Koenig has been a White House correspondent for 16 years. He is the president of Koenig World Watch Daily. Check it out at watch.org. That's watch.org. Bill publishes weekly Koenig's Eye View from the White House. He also authored Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. We covered that book April 29, 2015, so you can check out our channel on YouTube. William and his wife Claudia reside in the Washington, D.C. area. Welcome, Bill Koenig. It is a pleasure to have you again on Love for the Truth Radio.
Thank you, Cindy. Great to be with you again.
You know, Bill, we will be talking about your book on this show, Revealed, Obama's Legacy. And you stated in your book that you were deeply moved by the heartfelt joy and emotions of many Black Americans at President Obama's inauguration on January 20th, 2009, as were many Americans, including myself. Immediately, however, we all got a glimpse of Obama's strange ideologies from those who participated in the inauguration, especially during the prayer. And that's where I want to go, Bill. Let's discuss the pro-gay pastors that were displayed right from the beginning.
Well, yeah, that was obviously from the very, very beginning.
Yeah.
At one of the inauguration events, having this Gene Robertson, the event or Episcopalian priest being included right off the top, I thought, oh my gosh, here it goes.
Yeah.
Controversy. He used guys like Rick Warren and others to help give him some substantiation amongst the Christian community, and he starts right out with a guy named Gene Robinson, and then Reverend Joseph Lowry, and then an Episcopalian woman at the prayer event the day after the inauguration that didn't speak about God. She spoke about the wisdom of Cherokee Indians, and I go, oh, this is just not good. And then also the day of inauguration, he put up the LGBT agenda as he is being sworn in, one of the most far-reaching, unbelievable things ever put on the White House website, which we'll get into in a little bit. But, just those things right off the bat, Cindy, I'm going, oh, gosh, this is not going in the right direction, where you're honoring these people, these so-called people of faith, that's beliefs are complete contrary to the biblical foundation for marriage, whether it's LGBT agenda, homosexual agenda. And I thought, oh no, this is just a really bad start, a bad sign, and it proved it true for the 8 years following that.
And you know what, Bill, the first thing that I think of is that, the Bible says that we would know the end times because they would be as in the days of Lot and as in the days of Noah, or similar to it. And, when we look at this LGBT agenda, we see that it's definitely going in the wrong direction, that it's not the ordinance that God had created or the way that it should be, and so now we're seeing, okay, this did not get off at a good start. And you say that no earthly leader has done more to promote the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or LGBT agenda in the United States and around the world than Barack Obama, and that he has done more to promote immorality and perverse sexuality than any man in history. And this is what I want to talk about. Why don't we talk about the promotion of immorality and perverse sexuality, especially, all of us know that we saw the Rainbow White House, so that was a huge profession. But again, I believe we are moving quickly toward as in the days of Noah.
Oh, we for all practical purposes, were in that the last 8 years and still are.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, on the day he was being sworn in, myself, Joseph Farrell, World Net Daily, and a few others happened to go into the White House website, and there, buried under civil rights, was the LGBT agenda that ended up getting watered down quite a bit. It said that get rid of don't ask, don't tell, get rid of defense of marriage, moving this agenda where in the past, during Clinton's time in office, they had a National Gay Pride Month every June for 8 years. President Bush had nothing of that sort.
Right.
And then the first day you have a new president, he's putting this lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender agenda on the White House website. And literally, I have an original copy of it. It was beyond anything that we could even imagine in terms of magnitude and the language that was used. It was X-rated.
Wow.
Got watered down a bit later, but and also, which really annoyed a lot of black Americans, it was buried under civil rights. So that was the other thing, is he and his 250 activists that were in high-level government positions in most of the cabinet offices, whether it's commerce or defense, labor, energy, on and on, had activists, high-level activists that were promoting this agenda. And then most of the secular media that I work with at the White House were also totally into this. So this was like a tsunami. It was, building underneath the surface. But when the day that he was sworn in, it came out fast and furious, even to the extent of David Axelrod, his campaign manager, stating, no, Obama's always been in front of same-sex marriage. He said he favored civil unions, but he was always in favor of that. Well, he didn't say that because he thought it would cost him votes, or cost him the election, and that it wouldn't go over well. So I remember when he got rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, he was so excited about that. I remember Secretary of Defense Gates said, he showed a lot of emotion about getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but didn't show a lot of emotion about the U.S. military and our preparation and things like that. So, and then as you mentioned, the image on the White House website on June 26, 2015, after the Supreme Court made their decision. That's just an abomination to have that on the website. So, and the other thing is using U.S. money, taxpayer money, around the world, saying either you promote this LGBT agenda or it's going to affect the amount of money that we give your country. And he pushed it, the State Department pushed it, And I can tell you from traveling around the world, when the United States took this position, when the United States got behind it, it affected Israel in countries around the world, that then they started promoting it, then they started forcing it on their populations, which didn't have anywhere near the Christians like we do to fight it. And it spread like a wildfire all around the world.
Wow, so his influence was worldwide. I didn't know about that. And, that's when you say, oh, my goodness, is God's hand of judgment going to be upon us, I look at Isaiah 5:20, it says, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light, light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. We are witnessing so much of that deception today. And again, when somebody goes into an office, President of the United States, the most powerful, I would say, office in the world to right away promote such evil, is just, boy, and then again, when we look at what else he has done, in which we're going to go to the next point here, you mentioned in your book that no U.S. president or major world leader has done more to promote even Islam than Barack Obama, or you have here Barack Hussein Obama. And you had mentioned that Obama, and I kind of remember this, Bill, when he bowed down to the king of Saudi Arabia in April 2009, that was alarming. And I remember saying that to myself, because I think it was on the news, but it was only the beginning of his profession of faith, you say in your book. And why don't you share with us other incidents of how he promoted Islam, although we will talk a little bit about that later. But still, these are big agenda people. I mean, these are huge. So,
no doubt about it. And
yeah.
I think that's a benefit of being where I was. His first official TV interview was with Al Arabiya, the first week in office. And that's one of the largest TV networks throughout the Middle East. I have friends that work there, that work at the White House. And so he was on there talking about the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. He was talking about, then he went to Turkey in April of 2009 and said that that's where he said that the United States was not a Christian nation, a Jewish nation, a Buddhist nation, or a Muslim nation. It was a nation of many faiths. And then June 4, 2009, that's when he gave his hour-long speech to the Muslim world, and it was just totally deception. I mean, the speech was just inaccurate. He used the example that Thomas Jefferson had a copy of the Quran in the White House library. Well, he forgot to say the reason Thomas Jefferson had a copy of the Quran, because he and John Adams had obtained a copy because they were trying to figure out what motivates these Barbary pirates that continue to hijack U.S. and British and European ships.
Right.
And that's why he had a copy. And then he said as long as he was president, the door of America was open to Islam, talked about all the great things that Muslims had done throughout our history. And it was just his little 1 hour long address to the Muslim world. He equated the plight of the Palestinians with the Holocaust of the Jews. And it was a speech. I went into great detail. It's in my book. I went into detail with the speech and then countered a lot of the things that he had to say to point out the deception. So, and then, last February, just before he left office, he had a speech at a mosque in Baltimore, continuing to talk about Islam, how great Islam was. And, he never spoke about Christianity at all like this. Never talked about the horrible Christian persecution that took place in the Middle East the last couple of years. No mention of that. But if he had an opportunity, he would chastise us. He would tell us to get off our high horses. He did at a prayer event a couple of years ago. And that's just his way of getting the Islamic message out across America and opening the doors to Islam.
We're going on a break, and next segment, Bill will be sharing more highlights from his book, so please stay tuned.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
If you're a first-time listener, you'll find that on Love for the Truth Radio, we discuss news and views from a biblical worldview. We believe that the Bible is the inerrant Word of God and the absolute truth that should be applied to every aspect of life. We don't proclaim to have a cap on the truth, but we do have a love for biblical truth. So please, take everything you hear on this radio program to study and prayer. And thank you for listening to Love for the Truth Radio.
Welcome back. Our guest today is William Koenig, the author of Revealed, Obama's Legacy. If you want to know who the real Barack Obama is or why America is so divided, you will want to read his book. It's an eye-opener, and I know that you'll enjoy it. Again, that's William Koenig's book, Revealed, Obama's Legacy. You can order it on Amazon. Bill, in your book, you mentioned that Barry Soetoro, which is Barack Obama's real name, was raised early on in an environment of atheism, folk Islam, and humanism, and that he was a disciple of some of the most radical leftist figures of the past century. Let's talk about Obama's communist, Marxist mentors, that I would call them.
It's amazing how things happen in life, and even our pastor says that God's behind all circumstances, and especially for those that call on Jesus as our Lord and Savior, and how God has used those situations for His purpose and for His glory. And when you look at Obama's background, he professes to be a Christian, but you see nothing but a Muslim apologist, as I write about in chapter 2. But it was interesting as he came back to Hawaii when he was 10 years of age, young guy, and his white grandfather believed that he needed a mentor. So he had met a guy named Franklin Marshall Davis and thought that this would be the perfect guy for him. Well, Franklin Marshall Davis's lifestyle, his whole lifestyle, his belief in communism, his radical thinking, his Marxist mentality, his promotion of communism. He'd come from Chicago. He was a part of the Chicago Communist Bunch. And this is who Obama ended up having as a mentor at the age of 10 through the time of 18 when he left for Occidental College. And unfortunately, and I go into great detail in the book, is that 8-year period of mentoring did a real number on Obama, affected his thinking, affected his sexual lifestyle.
Yes.
It affected everything about him. And in some ways, you feel sorry for a young guy like this. In other ways, he became a very significant part of the Franklin Marshall Davis thinking, Saul Alinsky.
Yes.
And, he could have pushed away or moved away from that thinking, but he didn't. He absorbed it, became part of it, and then took it all the way to the White House when he was elected president.
Yeah. And then you look at Jeremiah Wright, who, do you know anything about him? He proclaimed to be, that was his pastor. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of churches in South Chicago. What happened is Obama wanted to get in politics in South Chicago, and they said, hey, well, you got to be a member of a church. If you're going to participate in South Chicago, you got to be part of a church. Well, who did he pick? Reverend Jeremiah Wright, a radical extremist who said horrible things, who was into black liberation theology, who said a lot of things over just before Obama got elected the first time, and then after, and Obama kind of moved away from him, but Reverend Wright was radical.
Yes, he was.
And Obama was in that church for 20 years. There's a lot of other churches he could have chosen in Chicago, but he ended up choosing Reverend Wright's church, and he was radical. So that had an influence.
Well, you look at the mentors that he had. Of course, he had the same mindset that he was used to. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely, Cindy. I mean, we all have. I think most of us have mentor options in our life, and we don't have to continue in a direction unless you go in the direction that you are part of, the direction that makes up your very being. You can have two choices. You can pick a good one. And pick one that's godly, that lives the way the Word of God speaks, or you can find someone that's radical and then is out on the edge, that promotes communism, that promotes living off the government. That led to an attitude is you need to take care of people that can't take care of themselves. Well, that's never enough, and that was part of his thinking. And Cass Sunstein and Bill Ayers and Saul Alinsky and others, they were radical, very radical in the way they did things, the way they did business. And it was interesting because Obama was articulate. The liberal Jewish man in Chicago took a liking to him. He had a powerful speech at the Democratic Convention. 4 years before he ran for president, that was well received, and he basically got groomed to become president of the United States, and a lot of Americans felt a guilt because of past treatment of Black Americans. And here's an articulate guy that had a dream, had a vision that spoke hope, and he was able to become president and then also be reelected. But our country, as we know it, will never be the same, and I don't know how you ever win back territory that was lost during those 8 years of Obama.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned Saul Alinsky, and some people are not familiar with those names, the mentors that he had, but Barack was clearly a disciple of Saul Alinsky. I know he had learned the rules for the Radicals from the Radicals playbook. He articulated some of these rules in his speeches while running for re-election in 2012. And maybe, Bill, if you can share with the audience Alinsky's maybe vision of vision of hope and change. Basically, it was the hatred of those who succeeded in the free enterprise system. But and we can see that clearly why he was against it. But I believe he was a community organizer on a larger scale, but we can see how Alinsky's influence of organizers, to hide true intention and lying kind of played out in the way that Obama, participated or ruled his agendas. I hope I'm not confusing everybody by that. But again, why don't we talk about Saul Alinsky's rules for the radicals?
Well, he was the guy that believed that you can do, during a period of chaos, take advantage of that. Alinsky was a chaos guy. He liked to create chaos and then operate within it. Never let a good period of chaos go unused. And he believed he was a Marxist thinker, spread the wealth, spread the money. He loved back the communist way of thinking, and he was. They were definitely rules for radicals, which was his teaching, and it was something. It was. He's a Jewish guy. Alinsky was a secular Jew. And I have some Jewish friends that say very committed secular Jews can be dangerous, and I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I have a Jewish heritage. So my father's side, they became Lutherans to hide their Jewish faith because of some of the radical things the Jews did back during World War I and World War II.
Oh, that's interesting.
And but the thing with Alinsky was interesting because he had this mentality that Obama followed with great detail of how to reorder through disorder. And then Franklin Marshall Davis. It was interesting is Franklin Marshall Davis was a friend of Valerie Jarrett's grandfather. And Valerie Jarrett ended up having a very key position within the Obama administration. And I have a lot of details about Valerie Jarrett and her background. And there was not any significant decision done in the White House with Valerie Jarrett not being part of it or approving it. Even to the extent of having that rainbow put on the White House on June 26, 2015, to celebrate the Supreme Court decision on marriage. That was part of her plan, and she organized that. So the bottom line is when you look at who influenced the radical thinking of Alinsky, Bill Ayers, Franklin Marshall Davis, Reverend Wright, Valerie Jarrett, is what helped mold Obama into his way of doing business and the way of thinking.
It seemed like he really heavily leaned on mentors. I guess maybe because he had them since he was young, but he really seemed to look up to and hold on to his mentors. It should have been Jesus Christ, but it wasn't, Interesting.
That's right.
Yeah. And so I know all through your book, you really stressed the tie that he had with Mr. Davis, and all the different ways that Valerie Jarrett, as she continued to influence and advise him in the Oval Office. Is there something you can mention that she, like you did with the White House, but was there something else that you want to say that she influenced him in? Well,
her family was very pro-communist.
Okay.
They were being watched very carefully. Her father was a professor. She was born in Iran, and they were very, very steeped in that thinking. And if I have my memory correct, Valerie Jarrett's mother was a friend of the lady that helped start Planned Parenthood. And, it was just one of those things. It was that she was very steeped in Marxism, socialism, let's take care of those that can't take care of themselves, that kind of mentality that was consistent with some of the other mentors, Cass Sunstein, and who was Samantha Power's husband. And, they had this attitude that also, you're talking about truth and telling the truth. They also had this idea, the end justifies means. If we have to lie, whether to get people behind Obamacare or anything else that we're trying to promote, then that end justifies means. If I have to say you can keep your doctors, if I have to say that your insurance, health insurance costs won't go up to get this done, I'll do it.
Wow.
And so that was the methodology of some of the things that they did. He told Israel in March of 2012, I think it was, he said that he will always have Israel's back.
I remember that.
But then you look at who he selected to represent him in the Middle East, such as Chuck Hagel, John Kerry, John Brennan, Samantha Power, Susan Rice, and Roger, one other fellow, Robert Malby, I think that's correct. I'm sorry about that. But these are people that did not have a good relationship with the Jewish people, that had a history of not always defending the state of Israel. And so I have your back, Israel, but then he selects people to represent him that did not back him, or that did not back Israel. So that made Israel very nervous. So this was a pattern of the end justifies the means.
Yeah, absolutely. You could see that. And I think that's where it became very confusing. He would say one thing and do another, and this was consistent. And Bill, just really quickly, what effect did his ideology have on our nation? Like he professed to be a Christian, and we'll talk about that in the next segment, but what effect did his ideologies really have on the American culture, and then also on our military morale? And if we don't get a chance to finish, we can talk about it in the next segment.
Well, he played to a nation that's changing. When you look, a lot of the young people through the social networks helped get him elected. 73% of millennials today favor same-sex marriage. You watch the mentality of college students when Hillary Clinton lost to Trump, where they were just grieved, where they need crying rooms, where professors said that you don't have to take tests, that kind of thing. It was just one of those situations where they were just, heavily influenced by Obama, and he was very successful in changing the country's direction because of that.
Well, we'll be right back with guest Bill Koenig. He'll be shedding some light on how Obama was a champion of the Muslim Brotherhood. You don't want to miss it, so please stay tuned.
Many would agree that we are living in unprecedented times. Grave immorality is on the rise, as in the days of Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah. There are wars and rumors of wars as nations rise against nations. Prophecy is being fulfilled as the birth pangs become quicker and harder. These are the signs of the return of Jesus Christ. There is one sign often left untaught. Jesus also told the disciples in the Olivet Discourse to take heed that no man deceive you. This warning applies to us too. Deception has infiltrated the churches through many false teachings and movements, making apostasy paramount. As contenders of the faith, we do our best to research and discuss these false teachings for you, the listener. Thank you for having a love for the truth.
Welcome back. William Koenig, our guest, has been a White House correspondent for 16 years. He's the president of Koenig World Watch Daily. You can check it out on watch.org. That's watch.org. Bill publishes weekly Koenig's Eye View from the White House. He authored Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. We actually did that interview on Bill's book. It was April of 2015. So if you want to check our channel, you can go back and listen to that. But today we're talking about Bill's book revealed Obama's legacy. So, Bill, though, and I wanted to talk about this, though Obama professed to be a Christian, and he has, and I think that's where the confusion came in. He would profess that with his mouth, but obviously his actions were something different. And on the back of your book, you claim in a highlighted bullet that Obama was a Muslim apologist and a defender of Islam in America. Now, we have talked about that, but my question is did Obama use Christian leaders to mask his Muslim faith? Was that something that he did on purpose?
Well, it was, you just see it over and over again, that there was no passion at all about Christianity. When he did talk about it, he was always chastising Christians.
Yeah.
Whether it was at a prayer event, whether it was get off, where he said, get off your high horse, talking about the Crusades, which was the Catholic Crusades, or the what happened in the southern United States during the Jim Crow days. And, another time he was he spoke a couple times against Christians that were conservatives, that opposed his positions on gay marriage and other things such as that, LGBT. And then the fact I read his book, to really get a handle for my book, I read his chapter on faith in his book, Audacity of Hope. And I go, this is so convoluted. He basically finds scriptures to use for his use, but the scriptures such as Romans 1, 18 through 32, and others that have to do with an immoral lifestyle, he just goes right through them and gives them no credence, or he'll pull out something in the Old Testament about stoning and things like that, and it was such a convoluted faith, but it was a faith on his terms. My chapter, my book is faith on his terms, and that's exactly the way he used scriptures. And he was very apologetic when it came to Islam, whether it was the speech in Cairo in 2009, or whether it's his messages to other Muslim audiences in Turkey or on Al Arabiya, and also the mosque in Baltimore, February 2016, where it was just a real apologetic message. He said he was a Christian in all those addresses, but it was just like reading a sentence.
Yeah.
There was no heartfelt feeling or anything to tell them about his faith. He just whipped right through it. So it was interesting, is because every once in a while his faith would be questioned, and then he'd take his family to church on that Sunday for a photo op. And then the media, the secular media, would say the next day, see, he's a Christian. See, he's a Christian. He was in church last Sunday. Well, I don't think he went to church maybe a handful of times in his 8 years in office. And again, he showed very little interest or very little heart for Christianity. If anything, the social justice message of Christianity. But then again, that wasn't even passionate to him. His passion was Islam.
Yes.
Being an apologist for it. Getting refugees in from the Middle East and Northern Africa, which were mostly Muslims. That's where I saw emotion. That's where I saw expression. And I didn't see any expression or motion over the plight of Christians that were being slaughtered for their faith throughout the Middle East.
Yeah. And clearly he's someone who understood the Muslim mindset, and he did often reach out to the Muslim world, as you've said a few times. Author Michael Oren, I think was that in your book? I think it was.
Yes.
Speculated that Obama's persistent outreach to the Muslim world was based on an abandonment issues by two Muslim father figures. So here we get a background of what Barack Obama grew up in. He grew up with mentors that mentored him on not only Islam or the Muslim faith, but also in the Solinskys and the rules for radicals. So we're getting a clear picture here of who Obama really is, no matter what he has said he was. You write, Bill, that never before have we had a president who was more divisive than Barack Obama. What were some of the policies that were in alignment, and I have to say this, with the Muslim Brotherhood agenda?
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood agenda, there was 5 or 6, maybe as many as 7 people in high positions within his administration that were very pro-Islam. They were very pro-Muslim Brotherhood. When he gave his speech in Cairo on June 4, 2009, he demanded that the Muslim Brotherhood from Cairo had a front row seat. The president of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, didn't even show up at the event. But the Muslim Brotherhood were given a very significant position there. And then when the Arab Spring broke out in Tunisia and then Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood took over and became the new leadership of Egypt and overthrew Mubarak. And, you know, he was even had the attitude, not many people know this, but a friend in Tel Aviv, Mordecai Kadar, wrote an article about the United Arab States, and that someone at the State Department had come up with this idea that in order to calm Islam, we need to come up with an Arab state type thing, just like the United States is, but have multiple countries under a flag of the United Arab States, and that could be run by the Muslim Brotherhood. So they had a key role. And at that time, Cindy, there was a lot of nervousness and concern in Jordan that government might be overthrown. That became very tenuous because there was Muslim Brotherhood figures there. There was also a pretty significant Muslim Brotherhood population in Syria. And then that war broke out, but Assad and the Alawites and the backing, and with the Shiite backing of Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood never really got much traction there. But they were backed by, the Muslim Brotherhood were backed by the Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan and also the Emir of Qatar. And there was great hopes for this this is a country of 80 million people in Egypt, and for these countries throughout the Middle East. And Erdogan of Turkey really kind of saw him as a potential future figurehead of a potential coalition of Arab states under a flag of United Arab States. The main thing is Egypt was one behind that. Their clerical and religious figures, and Morsi, who was the president of Egypt. I mean, this was a plan, but General Sisi responded to the 25 million people that went to the street in protest to the Muslim Brotherhood leadership. He very effectively overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt by taking down the top leaders, by just arresting them, putting them in jail. And when that happened, they couldn't operate, and the rest is history.
Oh boy, thank God for that. You know.
Absolutely.
Was Congress and the Senate aware of all this? I mean, like, were they on the edge of their seats seeing this happening, or was this something that they discovered later on? I know that you and I didn't talk about this, but was it something that was exposed later, or were they aware of this?
I don't think they were aware of it, and I think you know, if it wasn't for Mordecai Kadar, he was 28 years. Israeli intelligence. His focus was as a defense with the IDF. He was to keep an eye on all the Arab countries. Speaks fluent Arabic, and was very aware of all this. And he's the one that came up with that. And I don't know if that ever really got out here in diplomatic or political circles in Washington. That's what his plan was. You did have Huma Abedin was her family was Muslim Brotherhood members. Her mother had a relationship with him. Abedin did, and she was Hillary Clinton's top secretary or top administrative aide for many, many years. And so General Sisi, who's a very courageous guy, brilliantly said, I don't care if there's millions of survivors or millions of supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, if we can take down the leaders, they won't be able to operate. And that was exactly what happened. They determined there was about 120 that run the Muslim Brotherhood, and if we can arrest a lot of them, they won't be able to operate, and that's exactly what happened, and the rest is history, and Egypt has become a pretty decent security ally with Israel right now because of the fear of Islamic State expanding through the Sinai and working their way into Egypt. And also there was a lot of cooperation with Egypt and Israel over Hamas and closing the borders, which affected Hamas, which was a offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. So, this is big. It hardly ever got out. Right. Most people didn't even realize it was happening. But this was obviously a plan that was stopped by Sisi's courageous decision there, an overthrow of Morsi and Beatty, who was the religious leader, who were both thrown in jail and are in jail to this day.
Wow. Praise God, though. I mean, we didn't even know what was happening here. We were being protected. Yeah, wow. It was obvious, I know at least the Christians, that Obama supported the Palestinians over Israel. his last ordeal of supporting the Palestinians by giving them an exorbitant amount of money just before he left office proves this fact. But you say Obama's empathy for the Palestinians was born of an affinity for a totalitarian worldview. Why don't we talk about that? Because it was obvious, that he was definitely for the Palestinians.
They, he had Palestinian friends. He had pro-Palestinian, he had Palestinian friends at Occidental when he was there in college, and after college in Chicago. And I go into detail in the book about his Palestinian friends and his Muslim Brotherhood friends that all favored a Palestinian state. And even to the extent these people, especially the hardcore Muslim Brotherhood / Hamas members, possibly even the Turkish prime minister, eventually the complete destruction of the state of Israel, which was a plan of theirs all along. And obviously they haven't succeeded, and they never will succeed because the God of Israel will always intervene. Amen. So, yeah, he was very, very pro-Islam, pro-Palestinian. And what was also interesting is the Iran nuke deal, which he and John Kerry were hoping was going to be their great legacy item.
Right.
That's going to be a disaster. We're going to see that play out this year and next year. That was a disaster deal. But he did tell the Sunni leader of Saudi Arabia. See, the Sunnis are about 80% of Islam. And he told the Sunni leader, after the Iran nuke deal, you'd better get used to having two major powers in the Middle East, you and the Iranians.
Wow.
The Saudis and Iranians have had a lifetime and a long time history of dislike. And even though the Shiites are only about 20% of Islam, they are ruled by the leaders of Iran. And this was just blasphemy, especially as they're watching Iran move into positions of influence throughout the Middle East, into Yemen and Lebanon and Syria and Iraq, which is a Shiite country. So this was an example of a great concern about what Obama was going to do with Islam and also the effect it had on Israel.
We'll be back to conclude Obama's legacy, so please stay tuned.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, we read that men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, without self-control, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. They will be ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Thank you for having a love for the truth.
Welcome back. Our guest today is William Koenig, the author of Revealed Obama's Legacy. That's William Koenig's book, Revealed Obama's Legacy. You can order it on Amazon, and I would suggest that you get your hands on it. Bill, what I want to do is expound a little bit on Obama's legacy. We've said so much on this show, but I thought it was interesting that you said that he is the most biblically hostile U.S. president ever. And, you have all of these bullet points on the back of your book, which, it'll make your hair stand up. It's unbelievable what he has stood for. And, and the reason why I want to go over this is because a lot of people say, I don't know what he did. He didn't do much in the last 8 years. You hear that statement all the time. What did Obama do? Obamacare, whatever. But, this man, I believe from the beginning knew exactly what he was going to do. And he did it, even if it was behind the scenes or people didn't even know that he did it, but he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He knew exactly what his agenda was. And when he said that word change, does America want change? We know what kind of change he was talking about. We mentioned some of that during the program. Why don't we expound on his legacy and why you think he was the most biblically hostile U.S. president ever?
Well, first of all, as we started, the beginning of the program was the people that he had that were supposedly people of faith that were involved in his inauguration. Gay Episcopalian bishop, an Episcopalian lady that spoke of Cherokee wisdom. You had another reverend that spoke of him being in favor of LGBT. And then watching what he did in speeches, in audiences, chastising Christians at a prayer event, and then being such a Muslim apologist, being so favorable toward Islam in his speeches to the Muslim world, and his, this marriage, same-sex marriage, pushing transgenderism in schools. His education department, as well as his labor department, did everything they could, as well as in the military to promote the LGBT agenda. These are such disruptive, evil things, and that created great division in America because you got about half America favors it now and half that doesn't. But the big concern is obviously the 73% or so of the millennials who favor same-sex marriage, who have been indoctrinated by a lot of schools and universities for this agenda. So, and then his way of doing business with Israel, yes. The military's morale just taking a major hit, where it was difficult for chaplains to pray or how they ended their prayers. Chaplains leaving the military because of getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the difficulties that helped create. Yes. People like Tony Perkins being disinvited from going to a prayer event at Andrews Air Force Base, or Franklin Graham being his delivery at the Pentagon was canceled on a National Day of Prayer. When he had, his son was on, I think, his 7th or 8th tour of duty, his West Point graduate son who was in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, General Boykin under pressure, to talk about his faith or to stand for his faith. It just created a lot of disruption. It created division. And what's been very obvious has been watching the hearings of Trump's nominees, the Democrats of these committees. They talk the 3 or 4 major subjects that they bring up over and over again is a position on marriage, position on LGBT, a position on defense of, or Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The fact, is that going to stay, or abortion, or global warming. I mean, the Democratic Party is obsessed with those 3 or 4 or 5 major issues. Yeah. And the division we're seeing today is people fighting for this culture war. We got a culture war. And when Obama just finished office on January 20th and rode off into the sunset, there was a lot of damage done. There's a lot of landmines that have been set. There have been activists in every major government position. It's just been a really, really difficult time for Christians in the workplace that have to go through sensitivity training, or who are bashed or blasted for their biblical values, what it has to do with marriage or family or life. And it's just, and these things, I expand on a lot of them in the book. Yes. And, just to show people the level of damage that was done over the last 8 years. Yeah, and lecturing
God-fearing Christians on how to behave. We were constantly being bashed, I think, too, now what we're seeing is that he was in favor of refugees. In your book, you said refugees from the Middle East coming to the U.S., and it seems like that's what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, he really pushed that hard. He showed, again, as I mentioned a couple times in the program, Cindy, he showed great emotion about getting these refugees from the Middle East and Africa into the U.S., but zero emotion about the plight of Christians being slaughtered and persecuted throughout the Middle East because they were Christians. That's right. And then to be lectured by him in a couple of his speeches, or even by reading his book, his chapter in faith in The Audacity of Hope. Christians don't speak the way that he spoke, and Christians don't write the way he had written in his book, and as well as behaving. So this was a very difficult period of time. It's very difficult for Christians, but we put up with it. We prayed. We got more involved in the political world because the political world was affecting our lives. And then, it led to a new President Trump who is very favorable to evangelicals. 10 of the people nominated for cabinet positions are evangelicals.
That's awesome.
Who has promised to do things and defend a pastor's right to say what they want to say from the pulpit, not be penalized. So that's quite ironic. A man that's free-spirited and has his own method of communication and style through tweets and other. He's a great defender of our faith, and he has a lot of people around him that are defenders of the faith, Cindy, as you know. So this is huge.
It is
huge. And, he has his issues like we all do, but he and his cabinet and our country need continued prayers. We've always talked about our only hope's in Jesus, and we hope that all these crazy, chaotic times will lead to an even greater commitment to our faith.
Yeah, amen to that. And, we do see Trump that he's for the Constitution. And in your book, you said that Obama ran roughshod over the U.S. Constitution, that he undermined America's judicial system. And that's what we're seeing for President Trump, that he's trying to win that back a little bit, is go for our Constitution. And in that, we can pray for and continue to pray for him. In your opinion, Bill, and I know I mentioned millennials. Are our millennials indoctrinated with Obama's liberal progressive ideologies? We did mention that a little bit, but where do you see that happening as far as him indoctrinating them? I know that you mentioned the LGBT agenda, and that's huge. That's huge. But is there anything else that you can add to that?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the college campuses. Obama was in office. Let's say you're 18 and going to college. You were 10 years old when he took office.
Right.
They have put the LGBT thing into the school systems. States like California are having indoctrinations. Transgenderism working into school. His Department of Education forced that into the school systems. That whole behavioral situation, then leading into colleges that are overwhelmingly in favor of LGBT, that are overwhelmingly liberal, that are overwhelmingly doing a horrible job of preparing the young people for the life that is coming and the life that we've all led. That's the millennials. When you look at the thinking of the millennials, whether it has to do with abortion, I understand it is improving, which is great. But whether it's abortion, LGBT, whether it's a gender identity, that's very huge. That's very huge, and that's very significant. This gender identity thing, and then the fact that you have a lot of single parent households. You have a lot of children being born out of wedlock in the Black and Hispanic communities, also the white community. We've got a mess.
We have a mess,
and
definitely.
Yeah, we do, and we've also got people, as I mentioned too, that have been part of Obama's administration when he was in office, that had this attitude: is people can't take care of themselves, so we have to take care of them.
Right. Yeah. That's
so what we're going to do is. What we're going to do is take the money from the people that have worked hard for the money and then spread it around so we can take care of those people that can't take care of themselves.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's why more and more Black Americans like the entrepreneurial spirit of the Republican Party. Both parties have their issues. I mean, I'm not sitting here defending the Republican Party, but it's a lot more God-fearing Christians that are members of the Republican Party, and also the Republican Party is very supportive of the state of Israel, so those are all very, very important to us. But I think that anything else is you're going to see a lot of paradigms shifts and changes in the years ahead. There's going to be a war because this is a turf war.
Yes,
the other side doesn't want to give up their turf, and they gained a lot of turf over the last 8 years, even though they lost a lot of state houses, lost 1,000 people in political office. But they are fighting for what they gained territory-wise, but when it comes to legislatures and governors' offices and in the House and the Senate and the President and Vice President, they took a big hit over the last 8 years, and we're all thankful for that.
Yeah, they have. And, I just want to back up because you mentioned gender identity. That is so huge, and I believe that was an offshoot of the LGBT agenda. But when you look at gender identity, when you lose your identity of who you are and who God created you to be, that is ultimately confusion. Because how do you identify with the God who created you when he didn't create you right? In other words, he made you one way, but you think you're another. That's huge. That is so huge. And like you said, a lot of these young millennials, they were like 10 years old, when Obama took office, and here they're 18 or they're young adults now. Who knows what's on their mind? But another thing I wanted to talk about, too, is that we didn't mention was they are anti-Semitic as well. I mean, I know that we had a lot of problems on our college campuses with this idea of being anti-Semitic towards Israel.
Well, what's interesting about that? I talked to a young lady that, matter of fact, at the Israeli embassy a couple of years ago, and she was writing a book